Hello everyone, if you're new around here, if this is the first time you've pressed play on this podcast, let me just introduce myself quickly. My name is Oliver G. I'm Australian. I've been in Paris since 2015 and this podcast is my job. This is my career. And every week I interview interesting people from Paris, or perhaps I tell stories about my time in Paris and France, or in episodes like this one, I just share with you some tips, some advice, things that I've gathered from my time living in Paris as an expat, as a foreigner. So in this case, you're going to hear me sharing tips on how you can improve your spoken French. And I think unlike a lot of the other similar lists to this that you might find on the internet, I'm not trying to sell you anything here. I'm not trying to sell you my courses or my textbooks or anything. This is explaining how I improved my spoken French, which is mostly by sort of living here and talking to people, real life situations, and a little bit of daring, I'd say. You have to be a little bit daring to do it. So the idea with this list is even if you're brand new and you're only just learning French, there's stuff in there for you. If you're advanced, like I think I am, then there's definitely stuff in here for you too. And if you're in the middle, you should be fine. But just a little caveat before we get into the first one. I want to give you background on who I am because I think it's important when it comes to language. I'm a native English speaker. I speak Swedish fluently, which I learned as an adult, which I think really helped me with French. And when it comes to French, I speak maybe I'd say I'm 8 out of 10. How about that? 8 out of 10? And I stopped studying it in Paris in the same year that I got here because I didn't like learning in classrooms. So, yeah, there's the background. That's how I deal with languages. I'm not trying to be a polyglot. You like that? I think I made that word up. It's like a polyglot is someone who speaks a lot of languages. A polyglot is someone who brags about it. That's not me. I'm just using it for background, for information, so you know where I'm coming from. And finally, as we get into the list, I want to say thank you to the Eiffel Tower Patreon members who contributed to this list with their own words and wisdom in a conversation that I started online. You can join them at patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower. Every name you hear from now on is going to be a Patreon member who's contributed to the discussion, and I'd love it if you joined them. That's how I made this a job. So, how to improve your French. I've got a handful of good points here. They're also on the blog, but also I'm going to sort of splice this conversation up with dealing with some emails that I've got from people, complaints that I've got from people, a lot of complaints about the last episode, which we'll get into in due course, and I'll end it with some listener emails. As always, let's get into it with a jingle. Okay, so here we go. Ways to improve your spoken French. Number one, this is without studying. That's the whole idea. You don't need to read you can, but you don't need to read all the books if you don't want to. Number one, what I'd advise is that you repeat everything you hear, even if it's weird to do so. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people have talked about this before, but I think you should take it to the next level. Like, for example, I was in a bakery the other day, and the guy in front of me ordered a croissant or whatever. And as the ticket was printing out, like the receipt, he said to the woman behind the counter, he said, "Je vous laisse le ticket." I'll leave you the receipt, he said. And, that was the end of the transaction. He was polite, he smiled, and he walked out. And I never heard that formulation before. Je vous laisse, literally, it's you leave the receipt. And I liked it. And so what do you think I did? I even ordered the same food, the same croissant that he did. And then as the ticket was printing, before they had a chance to say, "Vous voulez le ticket?" I said, "Je vous laisse le ticket." And it felt really good. And I smiled and I walked out. You can do the same thing. You repeat it. And it's not just that. It's not just repeating customers in front of you. You can, something that I do is if I ask a question to someone and they respond, I often repeat their response. So you might say, you might ask someone the time and they'll say, "Oh, it's 2:30. And you go, 2:30. Especially if they say it in a weird way. Like, for example, I once asked someone how he was, and he responded, "Impec," which is short for impeccable. And I'd never heard that before, and I wanted to remember it. I said, moi aussi, impec. I loved it. And now it's part of my vocabulary. So repeat everything, even if it's weird. Number 2 is a similar kind of vein, and this is where you have to be a bit daring, but start unusual conversations with strangers, especially if you're a beginner. A lot of beginners, especially tourists, come to France with their sort of beginner phrases, and they never extend their French practice beyond, I'll have this, thank you very much, how much is it, here's your money, let's get on with it. But if you can just dare to start a weird conversation with a stranger, then often you'll learn from it. And an example of this, I'm going to try and give you as many examples as I can. A postman was walking past me a couple of months ago on the Ile Saint-Louis, and he was wearing this, I don't even know, like one of those old-fashioned hats. And I thought, I liked this hat, and I just thought the word for hat in French was chapeau. I just thought that was how you described everything. And as he walks past me, in fact, I bet you there's some people listening who know which postman I'm talking about. He's probably always walking around there. But he walked past me, and he looked at me. I was sitting on my scooter waiting to take off. And I said to him, j'aime votre chapeau. I like your hat, I thought anyway. And he really looked like I was alien speaking a foreign language. And it could have been my pronunciation, who knows. I said, j'aime votre chapeau, monsieur. And he didn't know what was going on. And I pointed up to his hat, and he said, mon bonnet, like bonnet. The word is bonnet in French. And I was like, oui, votre bonnet, oui, j'aime votre bonnet. And he was like, and then we got chatting a little bit. And he walked away happy. I felt like I'd done a good thing. I complimented him. I'd learned a new word, and we both went on our way. And I thought afterwards, if I hadn't have started this slightly unusual conversation, unusual in that I don't, just go around complimenting people on their clothes all the time, then I wouldn't have got anything out of it. So do the same thing. Start a conversation. You're probably never going to see him again, so don't feel embarrassed about it. That was an easy one. Some of these are going to get pretty weird, I will admit. And now's a good time to remind you that theearfultower.com, my website, for the first time maybe ever, I really wrote this list out in great detail. So if you got any spelling questions or you want to remember it, theearfultower.com, it'll be at the top of the site. And the reason I really wrote this one out is because I know these listy kind of podcast episodes and blog posts tend to go a little bit viral compared to some of the other ones. So I want it to be as, as good as I could make it. Let's get on to number 3. Ask one extra question. This is one of my golden tricks. I do this all the time. Have you ever seen me in a bakery or a shop or a restaurant in front of you in the line? You'll see me do this. Instead of, and it goes back to what I said in the last one, instead of just buying a croissant or a baguette and getting on with it, you'll learn really quickly that you don't get much of a chance to converse when you do that, especially the other people in line with you. It just goes so quick, and you walk out and you think, that wasn't, I didn't get anything out of that in terms of language skills. But try this. Next time you're in, let's keep it with a bakery, why not ask a question about one of the weird pastries you see at the front? I did it on a Patreon walk show the other day. I was in this really cool bakery in front of Le Fontaine de Mars. And I think a few of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about now, especially if you watched it. Rue Saint-Dominique, there's this beautiful old turn-of-the-century bakery. And I was about to buy a baguette, and then I saw these black, not like deep grey black baguettes on the wall there. And I said to the woman, I can't remember now if it was in French or English, but I presume it was in French. And I said, what's that thing there? What is that baguette? And so it doesn't matter if there's more people in the queue behind you. It's a legitimate question. I said, what is that thing? She explained that they made some of their baguettes out of charcoal. And we got into a little conversation about it. And it got me thinking, if you don't ask that extra question, not only will you always buy the same croissant or baguette or whatever, the same beer, the same everything, dare to ask that little question, even if you don't understand the response, Even if you ask the question incorrectly, I've done that a billion times. You can ask them how they've managed during the pandemic, for example. Have they been open? Just get talking. Ask one extra question, and it will do wonders for you. Break beyond that textbook French that you learn. This next one's really fun. And I can't believe I've never talked about this guy more on the podcast because he's a hero of mine. Number 4, to improve your spoken French, is listen to Charles Aznavour. He is an Armenian/French singer who everyone... Now, I don't know about the foreigners listening here. Maybe you're sitting there, I don't know, driving down a quiet road in New Zealand thinking, who the heck is Charles Aznavour? And I feel sorry for you if that's the case. But I don't know. Before I came to France, I definitely didn't know who he was. But now I've become a huge fan. French people, I'm going to do a podcast episode about him. Unfortunately, he's not alive anymore because he would have been my dream interview subject. But his songs captured the hearts of the French people. So if you ever ask a French person what they think of him, you'll see this reaction way beyond like Edith Piaf, for example. Like Edith Piaf, they say, oh yeah, Edith Piaf, great. Charles Aznavour, they'll start quoting his music. So I won't go on about him because I think I should do an extra episode, but listen to his music for several reasons. Firstly, the melodies are really catchy. The pronunciation is quite clear, but they're just such good songs that you can learn from. They tell stories, so you can put on his music, look up the lyrics as you go. That's something that Debbie, let's try and pronounce her last name, Kwasinski. That's what I'm going to guess. Kwasinski. That's my guess, Debbie, on your last name pronunciation. She says that it's much better than listening to Edith Piaf, who has a way of rolling her R's that the French are not supposed to do. She's right. Edith Piaf was always like, you can't go around repeating her to French people. People think you're crazy. But Aznavour, that's the key. That's what I did. Listen to lots of his music. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll put out a blog post later in the week with 10 songs to get you started on Aznavour. But listen to it. And then, point 5, use Charles Aznavour's words. This is one of my secrets, actually. I do this a lot. Find the songs that you like of his. As I said, French people know his music. And of course, you don't just have to do this for Aznavour. Do it for anyone. You do it for the newest, coolest French musicians that there are, or anything cultural, right? But Aznavour's a great start. Listen to his music, memorize a few quotes that you really like, especially from the chorus or whatever, and then use it in conversation. So I was in a clothes shop the other day, and there was a man and a woman that were working there, and I have no idea what we're talking about, but it was a very positive conversation, talking about things we liked, and they used the word formidable to explain it. It's so weird. When I said that just then, I put all my fingers on my left hand together, like in a little pinch, like an Italian, maybe like a French person, and said formidable. Try it at home. Try it if you're sitting on the metro, on the subway in New York right now. Formidable. It's better if you do it with your hands. But anyway, so when they said that word to me, I said, for me, formidable, like that, which is a lyric from one of his popular songs. And it's like it's like this warmth just passed over them because I was doing like a little, like it's clear to them that my French isn't perfect, that I'm a foreigner. They're probably thinking, this Australian, he's only an 8 out of 10 French. But look at him. He's using this song that we all know and love. It's showing that he's making an effort with French. It's even showing a bit of his personality, that he would sort of dare to chuck this little French, I don't know, quote into conversation, and they loved it, and they started talking about Aznavour and had a good old laugh. I think we all maybe sang a little bit. Of course, you don't have to do it with formidable. You can do it with whichever one you want, whichever song you want, but if you want my tip, throw an Aznavour song reference into conversation, and you'll thank me for it later. Now, let's break up this list a little bit now that I've done the first 5 with a little look at some of the complaints I got about last week's episode. I've never seen so much negativity from the listeners, but it wasn't... I'll explain why. Okay, it's kind of funny. Like, a lot of it wasn't really complaints, this first bit. It was feedback that the episode last week about the abandoned town, the ghost town. There's a lot of people saying that they wouldn't go there. They didn't like it. A lot of people asking why I was sharing it, saying this doesn't look like it's something for us to visit. And the truth of the matter is, I find it interesting. Someone said it wasn't interesting, but I mean, I disagree. I thought it was really interesting, and I think it's important to think that Paris isn't all Just beautiful stuff. A lot of the pages out there that you can follow about Paris, Instagram pages and so on, just beautiful stuff. I want to share the interesting stuff too. I don't know. I think I even said in the episode I definitely did. I said I don't recommend that you guys go there, but I thought it was cool to talk about. But so there was a lot of negativity that came in there. Although I did get a nice Instagram message from walk.paris. He said, one of the reasons I got hooked on the Eiffel Tower was Oliver G's honesty. He gets excited about cool stuff in Paris and remains honest about the city. He's not afraid to fact check the hype that gets copy-pasted from travel blog to travel blog and to share the results with the Anglophone world, like in his latest episode about Goussainville. Thanks for keeping it real, Oliver, says walk.paris. And that's what I was going for, so I'm glad that you got it. The other thing, also kind of funny, I made a mistake in the episode. I started off trying to be all romantic and sort of haunting and poetic by starting the story. If you haven't listened to it, I started the story in 1971. And then I flashed forward to present day 2021, which of course is 50 years forward. But for some stupid reason, I said 40 years forward. I said flash ahead 40 years. I think I used the word 40 a few times because I got a surprising amount of comments about it. I think in fact, it was pretty even. I got 10 comments on Instagram about it. People saying, my brain, you got it wrong. It should be 50. 10 on Instagram. I got 10 in email, just straight on email. I got 10 in Facebook, and I got 10 on Patreon in the comment field there. So 10 on Instagram, 10 on Facebook, 10 on Patreon, and 10 via email. So 4 10s there. 50 comments from people with little maths fixing for me. I swear I'm good at maths. You don't need to write in, guys, but I do appreciate it. Let's get ahead to number 6 on the list. And this is probably the one that helped me advance my French the most. Set out to solve a problem. Preferably a problem that's not insurmountable. For example, let's say disputing a phone bill, or if you're more of a beginner, canceling a restaurant reservation. Something that's very tangible that you go in and you need, like, not just once again buying a beer or something. That's not a problem. Fix something, because you get this cool feeling when you've succeeded, when you've climbed this mountain. It's a really interesting way of it's because it's very real. It's not textbook stuff. It's not practicing. Often, and this is crucial too, often the person that you maybe are even arguing with, they maybe don't want to help you, which can make it even more interesting. For example, if you want to get really advanced, imagine arguing about how a missing document surely shouldn't mean that your newborn child doesn't get a birth certificate in Paris. Imagine that. There's a story I'll tell you guys one day. Learning to argue or learning to sort of discuss something, to solve something is a very, very good way to improve your French. And it might seem really difficult from the beginning, but that feeling of getting it done is worth gold. Extra points if you do it on the phone, so you don't have those facial clues that you get in-person conversation. And if you can't think of a problem, if you don't have any problems to solve, make a problem for yourself. That's not that hard. Cross the pedestrian crossing at the red light and get in trouble with the police and argue your way out of it, you know? There are a million. If you really can't find a problem, give me a call. I got a million that you can help me solve. But you'll also feel better about yourself, even more if you don't have to put someone else out. You guys will figure it out. Here's another one. This one I've used for a long time, and I slightly edited it for this podcast episode because I don't want to offend anybody, and I've offended people in the past. And this trick I learned when I was learning Swedish. And in Sweden, they speak such excellent English that when they'd hear me bungling along in their language, in Swedish, in those early days, they'd always switch to English, perfect English. And I got so frustrated because I wanted to practice my Swedish, you know? So I used to say I was from another country. And you can pick any country you want because it's you who will offend that country, not me. But for this podcast episode, I'll just say it. I'll tell you what I did. I used to say I was Polish. And my figuring there was, if I say I'm Polish, the chances of this Swede not speaking Polish is very high, you know? It's sure that they're going to go, oh, you're Polish, sorry. Let's continue in Swedish. But once I wrote that in a Swedish column that I used to write, and I got complaints from Polish people who, I don't know, misunderstood what I was trying to say. So in this instance, to improve your French, if they hear your accent, if they hear your American accent, if they hear your Australian, Canadian, British, whatever, and they try and switch to English with you, try this out. Say that you're Swedish. Say, je suis suédois, or je suis suédoise if you're a woman. Say, je suis suédoise, je parle pas anglais. This is pretty, this is daring. This is one of the most daring ones. You say you're Swedish, you say you don't understand English, please can we stick to French? And they'll probably feel pretty embarrassed. You are lying in this one. You are lying, and that's up to your own conscience if you want to do it. But they'll typically, as what happened for me, is they'll say, oh gosh, sorry, let's continue in the language that you were trying, and you'll get away with it. Best that you do this with strangers, not in a job interview somewhere that you're going to work. And if you are going to say Swedish, make sure you learn a little something about ABBA or the football player Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and just cross your fingers and hope that the person you're speaking to isn't a Swede, because then you're in serious trouble. But this one works. I've done this one several times. I've done it in France and I've done it in Sweden. Say that you don't speak English. Lie. And just hope it doesn't go too deep. Je suis suédois. Je parle pas anglais. Désolé. Just do it. And the reason I feel also that I can joke about the Swedes and not the Poles is because I married a Swede. I think I get their sense of humor, and I think the joke works. Send me an email if you ever try this. I would love to hear how it went. Point 8, get a QG. What's a QG? You might be saying a QG. It's spelled QG. It's a French word that I love. I first heard it here talking in a taxi, actually. A taxi driver once asked me, because I remember he was dropping me home somewhere, and he says, oh, Montmartre. This is when I was in Montmartre. He said, I love it here. Where's your QG? And I was like, QG? I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, oh, QG, c'est Quartier Général. And I still didn't get it. I was like, what's Quartier Général? And it's just like your, it's like your hangout. It's the place that you go a lot. It becomes your QG. QG. And the idea here is if you get a QG, then you're much more likely to have a deeper conversation with people. This one was actually sent in by a regular listener, regular commenter, and Patreon supporter Carl Beam. And he says that once you start frequenting the same shops, cafes, and bistros, and this is a quote, he says, you naturally begin small conversations. And before you know it, you've got several regular conversation partners. He says the waiters at the Café Saint-Régy on the Ile Saint-Louis strike up conversations every time he visits. And I agree, 100%. In fact, if you want to fast track this, which I also do in France a lot, is when I go to a restaurant or a cafe or whatever in the area where I'm living, especially because I move around a lot, I tell the waiter if it's quiet, or I tell the bartender that I'm a neighbor. I often say that. I go, je suis votre voisin. I live next door or down the road, because I know that they talk to a lot of tourists. I know they probably get sick and tired of being polite to someone they're never going to see again. So I'm kind of saying to them, this could be my QG. I could be coming back here a lot. Let's be friends, sort of. And if they want to be friends with me, if they want to chat with me, I probably am even more likely to come back. If they're super rude to me, that's fine too. There's a million restaurants in Paris. It doesn't matter. I'll go next door. So get yourself a QG and let me know how you go on that one. Number 9. I like this one. And this is how I'm going to weave in the taxi driver. Number 9 is get your hair cut. And this is a tip I forgot about, but my father-in-law reminded me of it. He speaks decent French, and he wanted to improve. And I said to him, look, mate, you need a haircut anyway. I guess we're fairly close if I can say that. I said, look, if you get a haircut, you're guaranteed a 30-minute French conversation. And I said, and this was true for his case, I said, if he tries to speak English with you, say that you're Swedish, which obviously he was. And I said, you're going to get the exact conversation that you want. You're kind of a prisoner here. You know, they like to talk, hairdressers typically. You can consider it like a French lesson. Sure, you're paying for it a lot more than you'd pay for a French lesson, but you'll come out with a good haircut, hopefully. But it's like if you force yourself to be a prisoner and chat with someone like that in a position where you're paying for it, which is how the taxi driver comes in. If you can afford a taxi or an Uber, it's the exact same thing. Airport drive, you can talk to that taxi driver the whole time. They often like it. But force yourself Just force yourself. And it was a few years in Paris before I dared to force myself into those French conversations at the hairdressers. Often I'd start off, I'd say, do you speak English? Because I thought it was so important to get a good haircut, more important than having that conversation for 30 minutes. But after a couple of years, now, like when I go into the hairdresser, I just do it in French. Who cares how my hair looks at the end? I'd rather have a good conversation. In all seriousness, I'd rather have a good conversation than an excellent haircut. And it's not that hard to say what you want with your hair, is it? You guys will be all right. Another way of making yourself a prisoner is something I wrote about in my book, Paris on Air. I know a lot of you listeners have read it. I did language exchanges with my neighbor Stefan, and we do English for half an hour, French for half an hour, back and forth until the wine ran out, as long as we never diverted back to our native language. And Linda Vaughan wrote in, and she says she does the same thing with her French friend. I think she says, it forces me to move beyond my tourist French as I'm having to figure out how to have a normal conversation with a friend, but in French. So great tip, get your haircut or be a prisoner, essentially in a taxi or somewhere else. Prisoner is a bit of a negative word. Please, prisoners, do not write in and complain. No more complaints about little things. Number 10, I like this one. Number 10, don't worry about your grandma. Regular listener Catherine Barnett sent this one in. She says, if you want to improve your spoken French, you should forget all about your grandma. Oh no, hang on. I'm reading that one wrong. She says grammar. Forget about your grammar. That makes more sense. Yes. She says, don't worry about your grammar, but try to get the sound and inflection correct. It's all about communication. Children learn by repetition and gentle correction. They communicate and aren't self-conscious about mistakes. But as adults, we find it hard to do that. She says, my goal is to improve pronunciation and just go for it. What's the worst that can happen? I might get myself in a pickle, but I'd be un cornichon. Using the French word for pickle. Very well written. Very well written, Catherine Barnett. I love it. Long-time listener and Patreon support. I've met her too in Paris, in Montmartre, many years ago. So yeah, be like Catherine. Don't worry about your grandma. And she's right. I don't care about. I mean, listen. French teachers listening to this are going to get angry. That's fair enough. I would get angry too. But if you want to communicate, if you want to master French, begin with the grammar, end with the grammar, do everything to get that grammar right. But if you want to get by, if you want to speak, if that's your goal, like it was for me, just get on with it. Don't fret about if you're getting the verbs right, which leads us nicely into point number 11 from another friend of the show, Shelley Bittler. And I like this one a lot. She says, don't focus on the other verbs. And let me explain. She says she had a light switch moment that helped improve her French dramatically. I'll just read. I could do her accent because I know Shelley, and it's a North Carolina accent. I bet I could do it really well. And because she's a friend, I could probably get away with it. Let's give it a go. Y'all. Okay, Ollie. Hey, Ollie. At one point, I realized that No, I can't do it. I'll try it. At one point, I realized that for basically all the conversations I was... For all the conversations I was having, I really only needed to know the present, past, and maybe future tense of 2 to 3 verbs. Être, avoir, and the future for aller, which is I am, I have, I will go, I did, I went, etc. So I memorized those, ignored the rest for a bit, and it got so much easier. My brain space was freed up from trying to wrap my mind around all the grammar rules, and I figured that I could actually say a lot more than I thought I could. I ended up absorbing far more other vocabulary because I wasn't twisted around trying to figure out the subjunctive. And by the time I got around to having deeper conversations in French or needing to use those tenses, I'd become much more comfortable speaking and became easier to understand. So, my tip, figure out the couple of verbs you need to know for the most basic conversation, memorize them, and then use them and stop worrying about the rest. Now, this is smart. Shelley is smart. In fact, Shelley is the one who recommended I rent a chateau for my 30th birthday. So if you listen to my audiobook, my audio experience, you've heard her voice. She's the one that goes, she goes, Ollie, chateaus are really cheap in France. You should, oh gosh, you're going to kill me. But there you go. Don't focus on the other verbs. 2 more to get through, so I'll take a quick pause and say, remember, I'm going to read an email at the end with a question in it. But also, if you want to get in on these episodes, if you want to join the discussion, if you want to be part of the gang, patreon.com/The Earful Tower. And if you're new around here, the idea with that is, imagine Netflix, where you pay a monthly subscription to get access to all the videos and so on. It's just like that here on the podcast, except my podcast is free. So when you sign up, you get all the extra stuff. So when I do the walk shows, the videos, my guides to Paris, the scrolls that come with some episodes, the conversations like this, the podcast will always be free for you guys. That is a guarantee. You can quote me on that. But the way it survives and continues is that people sign up. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. So if you like it, you can sign up for as little as $5 a month. The full membership is $10 a month. Or if you pay for the whole year, you get 2 months for free and access to everything. So check it out. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. That's how this show runs. That's how I can get away without doing adverts, these boring ads you hear on other podcasts. This is just Patreon. So thanks to the members, you guys who are there, and thanks for sending in all your quotes. 2 of them are coming up right now. So point number 12, watch French shows twice. I like this one. There's so many good TV shows coming out in French, and when you get them, do not watch them dubbed. That's the golden rule. Never watch them dubbed. Firstly, French is a beautiful language to listen to, even if you don't understand a word. But dubbing dubbing makes me sick. Do not watch them dubbed. Listen to them in French. Now that's how the watching it 2 times come into it. If you watch it the first time in French with English subtitles, you can follow the plot perfectly. Like, I understand if you want to watch Lupin, or I don't know, Call My Agent, 10%, or is it 10%? Someone write it and let me know. It's I get it. Like, you want to understand it the first time around, so fair enough. But if you want to get better, is watch it again, but with French subtitles, or even without the French subtitles, and repeat things that they say. This sort of ties in with point 1. Colette Carroll Field, she recommends this, and she says, when you do it, you're training your ear on the sounds of spoken French, and then you can practice speaking by mimicking all their phrases. A new listener, actually, Jonas, he said to me, I told him that I was doing this episode. He said what he can recommend when it comes to learning languages, especially French, is watch movies. If you're a little bit more advanced, this is, of course, watch movies that are in foreign languages that you don't speak, but with French subtitles. So, for example, he said that he watched a bunch of, I think it was South American movies, so in Spanish, but with French subtitles. And so he couldn't, like if you're listening to a language that you speak, you end up trying to fight between the 2 languages, listening to the English and, thinking, oh, that translation didn't look very good. Forget that. Watch a Japanese film. Watch a Korean film. Some of those amazing Korean films with French subtitles. And that way you're forced to focus, really. So try it out, and welcome Jonas and also his wife. Welcome to the show, and thanks for your tips. Now, 13, the last point. I like this one as well. Don't be afraid to fly solo. I think this really will resonate for a lot of people who have a French husband or wife or friend or partner or boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever. A lot of people come to Paris or live in Paris with a French helper. It's like me in Sweden. I've got Lena who speaks Swedish. It can be really easy to rely on them to help, whether that's, taking over the conversation with a waiter, or whether it's, I don't know, organizing social security numbers or something. And it's a safety blanket, and it's actually dangerous sometimes. You need to be able to fly solo. You need to dare to fly solo. Even if you're in that position, you should make sure that you order some food. Don't let your husband do it all the time. But if you want to take it to the next level, in fact, it's also really fun to do it. Like Lena and I, when we both moved to Paris, didn't speak much French each. So we were both flying solo together, which is quite romantic, I think. But Rebecca Di Pasquale, or Di Pascale, maybe, she writes in and she says, why not travel solo? Traveling solo forced her to use French much more. And she says that is unless, of course, you end up at a party at the Australian ambassador's residence, chatting with a bunch of English speakers, ... That is clearly an inside story for you guys who've been around for a while. Rebecca, lucky you to be at the big party at the Australian Embassy. Thanks for being a member back then and still today. Here's to more events. If you're new around here, I'll explain. I had this I shouldn't have to explain this one. It was in the book. I had a big blowout event with 100 people. In fact, I invited only Patreon supporters. And we had 100 people who showed up at the Australian ambassador's residence for a talk show. And I want to do way more things like that now that Paris is really opening up again. But the point here, don't be afraid to fly solo. And I think that was kind of one of the morals of this episode, was that you got to dare. You got to dare to speak French. It's kind of that simple, really. Dare to speak French. Put yourself in situations where you have to do it, and you will advance quickly, as I feel I did. That wraps up the list. 13 tips there. If you want to sort of relive it, it's going to be at the top of the blog. I'm going to read an email to end things here, but while I'm just pulling that up on the computer, I want to say to everyone who is listening right now on Spotify, Android, iTunes, wherever, especially if this is your first episode, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that follow button or subscribe. It's free to do it. This podcast is free. But why it helps me is when I try and attract big guests, if I can say to them, this show has had 2 million downloads, they're much more likely to take me seriously than if I say it has 65 downloads. The good news is the 2 million mark is coming very soon, very, very soon, and we'll celebrate it accordingly. But that's how these downloads help. It helps me if it's on your phone. If you're already subscribed or following or whatever, recommend it to a friend. It's that easy. And if you find that you really like the show, as I've said 10 times already, become a Patreon supporter and help it to grow. But the email that I'm going to end on comes from Mayreni Swice. Mayreni Swice, lovely name. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Mayreni. May like the month, Ren like the bird, E as in E. It could be Mayreni. It could be Mayreni, but I think it's Mayreni Swice. And she sent in a lovely email. She says, Bonjour, Oliver and Lena and Otis. Congratulations to you all on this new and exciting stage of life. Firstly, it's been a pleasure to re-experience Paris on air after having read the first print edition. Oh, first edition. Thanks so much. That's the one that has the typos in it. She says it was wonderful to read it when it first came out, especially during the pandemic, and it has been sublime to experience it again via the podcast. Thank you so much for saying that, Mayreni. She says, secondly, I've been a follower since 2018 and a Patreon member in 2020, which is definitely worth it. Thank you for all the hard work and dedication you put into making such a great experience for us Paris lovers. My pleasure. She says, as I was listening to the final chapter you recently published, a question popped into my mind that I'm curious to know. And all you people who are listening wondering the best way to get an email read out on the show, it is to end with a question. Give me something to answer, which is exactly why I'm reading this one out now. She says, when writing your memoir with such great and colourful detail, I may add, did you write it all from memory? If so, that is incredibly impressive. Or did you listen to old podcasts to jog your memory, possibly referred back to a daily journal about your life in Paris? Or were you secretly writing your memoir early on in the Eiffel Tower's journey? But she says, merci beaucoup and best regards to the G family. Thank you very much. I'll answer that question. I love the question. And I don't think anyone asked me this yet. I did, first I can say I didn't listen to any old podcast episodes at all, which is kind of crazy. But I have basically never listened to old podcast episodes. And I don't know why. I've sometimes ducked into them, but I quite like the idea of maybe listening to them all one day in 10 years or 20 years or something. The only ones that I've listened to several times are Finding Mary, which I particularly like, the one with me and my little brother. And if you're new around here, go listen to that one because that's one of my favorites. I recently listened to the Philippe Auguste Wall hunt, which I really enjoyed doing. And the other one is The Crocodile in the Canal. Those episodes I really love, and I've probably listened to several times, and they were really fun to do. But the other ones, I don't know. I feel like they're, I don't know. I haven't listened back to them, and it was kind of crazy to write that honeymoon chapter without going back and listening because we detailed it so well on the show. But to answer the question is, I did a lot from memory, but that memory has been really aided by the fact that I tell stories a lot. So for example, the wedding story which I won't spoil it if you haven't read the book, but that story I've told dozens of times. And when you tell a story out loud, you learn which bits work really well and which bits don't work. And as for me, as I tell it over and over again, I improve it over and over again. And so when it came time to write it, I knew exactly what to write. And I got a lot of emails and reviews on that book of people who said it felt like they were sitting in a bar or whatever, listening to me telling them a story. And that's exactly why, because they were well practiced, which is the only thing is I could add more because I had the time to go back and research, what trees were there planted out the front of that chateau, for example. Things that I don't tell in the stories, but I think are necessary for a book, that extra color. So no, I'd practiced a lot of the stories before. In fact, I read recently that Jack Kerouac, when he wrote a book, he said he'd been practicing it for a year, so that when it came time to write, he's like, why should someone write 500 words a day? No, you sit down and you write that thing if you got it in your head ready. And I know that's not how everyone does it, but I that resonated with me. But on top of that, I never kept a daily journal about life in Paris, but I always take notes when someone says something I find interesting. I think it'd be really hard to fake dialogue, or I felt like it'd be kind of disingenuous to fake it. But a lot of the dialogue that you read in that book, I wrote it down, especially when people say funny things or interesting phrases. I get out just my phone and I take notes. I write exactly what they and sometimes, often, I go back and I'm like, what the heck have I written here? This makes no sense. But more often than not, I've sort of nailed the key part of the story that I would never remember otherwise. So it was a lot about that, jotting down notes, which I'm still doing over the past sort of year and a half since the book came out. I think you'll be glad to know. So there's plenty of content for another book, but it's in retelling for me. It's been retelling those stories. So there you go. There's a full answer to your question, May Rennie. I hope that answers it for you, and good luck if you're writing your own book, which I always suspect when people ask me those kind of questions. Good luck to you. For everybody else, send me messages. I love it, especially the positive ones. Become a Patreon supporter and consider buying the books. They're theeiffeltower.com/shop. While you're on the site, go and check out the blog post that I made that goes with this episode if you liked it. If you really liked it, share it with a friend. And most importantly of all, if you're learning French, take some of these tips and try them out. And I hope that you can improve, because improving in a language is really great for your brain. You'll feel better. The French people will thank you for it. And probably somewhere in Paris, I'll be sitting there with a smile on my face, knowing that I helped you jump over the next barrier to being better at that beautiful language. With that, merci beaucoup, everyone. Au revoir.
I don't really know where we are. I just wanna